Hey guys, welcome to another video. This one's going to be a little bit different. Um, and I'm going to be reading from a script I've prepared because there's a lot of information I want to convey and I want to make sure I do it accurately and concisely. So let's say, purely hypothetically, I decided to run for president of the U.S. And let's say, enough people actually supported the idea that I thought, okay, let's do it. So, I wouldn't run because I want power. I would run because, I think government is supposed to work for the people who live here. So if I were president, here's what I would try to accomplish. And just to be clear, some of these things could be pursued by a president directly. Others would require Congress to pass. So I'm talking about policies I'd fight for, because I'm not going to pretend, that the president is a king who can simply snap their fingers and bam, it happens. So, number one, first I would completely rethink our tax system. The Federal Reserve estimates that the wealthiest 1% of Americans currently hold about 31.6% of America's household wealth, which is roughly $55 trillion. So I would propose a progressive annual wealth tax on the top 1%, beginning around 6% of net worth, with carefully designed exemptions and anti-avoidance rules. I'd also raise taxes on extremely high incomes and increase the federal corporate tax rate from today's 21% to about 28%. And before somebody says that's confiscation, no, because we're talking about the wealthiest 1%. The goal isn't to make everyone equally wealthy. The goal is to make sure that extraordinary concentrations of wealth contribute substantially to the society, infrastructure, workers, courts, education systems, financial system, and government that help make that wealth possible. And I would use that revenue to fund the rest of this agenda. Second, I'd establish a universal basic income of $1,000 per month for every adult and $500 per month for every child. So that's $12,000 a year for every adult, $6,000 a year for every child. And using current population estimates, that would be roughly $3.7 trillion a year before accounting for any offsets or interactions with existing programs. And no, I don't think people should have to stop working to receive it. Quite the opposite. If you work, you get your paycheck plus the basic income. That way, if you lose your job, you don't immediately lose everything else. If you want to leave an abusive relationship, you have some financial independence. If you're a parent, student, caregiver, or disabled person, you have a basic financial floor. I'd also protect and expand programs for people whose needs are greater than what UBI can cover. Next, I'd establish universal health care. Because it shouldn't depend on whether your employer likes you. It shouldn't disappear because you change jobs. And getting, cancer shouldn't potentially mean financial ruin. So I'd move toward a universal public health care system that covers Americans regardless of employment status. And yes, that would fundamentally change the private health insurance industry. My hope is actually that without business, they would fail to exist or, cease to exist. So my goal would be to make comprehensive health care a public guarantee rather than something people have to purchase through an insurance company. And importantly, I designed the transition carefully so that millions of people currently working in the insurance industry aren't simply thrown into employment. Next, this is where it gets really fun and really radical. Um, I'd propose a 20-hour standard work week, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'd also propose a federal minimum wage of $55 an hour, including workers who currently depend on tips. So this would eliminate tipping culture um, for good. And so that means a person that's working 20 hours a week at the federal minimum would make approximately $57,200 a year before overtime or other compensation. I'd also require employers to provide substantial paid vacation, paid sick leave, and at least 6 months of paid maternity and paternity leave. Now, I know exactly what somebody's going to say, which is businesses can't afford that. That's why I wouldn't pretend that this can happen overnight. It would be a process that I would have to phase in. I'd provide transition assistance for the small businesses. I'd study productivity and labor market effects, and I would allow for the economy time to adapt to that. But I fundamentally reject the idea that Americans should have to sacrifice their entire lives just to survive. I think there needs to be a better work home balance. And if technology allows us to produce more while working less, then maybe the reward for technological progress should be more human freedom. Next, I would completely overhaul America's prison system. I would take serious lessons from rehabilitation-based systems, including Scandinavian approaches, because prison should protect society, but it should also give people a genuine opportunity to become productive members of society. So there would be education, mental health treatment, job training, addiction treatment, counseling, actual preparation for returning to society. I would also federally legalize marijuana. I would order the Justice Department to pursue the immediate release and expungement of people whose only federal criminal conduct was marijuana related, while working with states on comparable relief for state convictions. I'd also abolish the federal death penalty. Because, like I said, we should focus more on rehabilitation instead of punishment. And if someone can be permanently separated from society without being executed, I believe that's the direction that we should take. I'd invest more heavily in community-based public safety, which means mental health crisis teams, domestic violence services, addiction treatment, youth programs, homelessness intervention, community violence prevention, and I'd reduce the amount of money going toward traditional policing where alternative services can handle the problem more effectively. I'd also propose major restrictions on police access to firearms, with armed tactical capacity remaining available for situations where firearms are genuinely necessary. Otherwise, they would be limited to carrying like batons and pepper spray. They shouldn't automatically be the first response to every social problem. And sometimes the person who needs to show up isn't a cop. Sometimes it's a medic or a social worker or a mental health professional or a trained crisis response team, and that's the focus of that. Then I'd begin aggressively transitioning America away from fossil fuel dependence. I wouldn't pretend there's one magic energy source. Instead, we would pursue a combination of nuclear, solar, wind, hydropower, energy storage, and technologies we haven't fully developed yet. We would massively expand research into safer, cleaner, more efficient energy. For nuclear waste, we would support deep geological disposal with rigorous monitoring and safety standards. The goal wouldn't simply be stop using fossil fuels. The goal would be build an energy system so good that we don't need them anymore. Please see part 2 for the remainder of this message.